All right, so if you are an academic, researcher, or a scientist, then hopefully at some point you've asked yourself, how do I share academic information with non academic audiences? So, hello, I'm Dr. Echo Rivera, and I help technical people, I guess, create effective and engaging presentations. And a question I get asked all the time is, how do I share my technical information with a non technical audience? And I have training on this in my masterclass program, and I work with members one-on-one to answer this question for their presentations. But this is a question that I think anybody who has to share data or research information should be thinking about, which is why I'm not alone. And as you've noticed, I have somebody here with me. So I wanted to bring in an expert to talk about this topic more broadly. So I have Jeanine Draut on my channel. So Jeanine, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you help technical people share information to non-technical audiences.
Thanks so much, Echo. I'm really excited to be here with you. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I'm Jeanine Draut, and I'm a writer, editor, and a learning designer. And I focus on making experts able to explain their complex and technical information and make it a little bit more accessible to people who aren't experts. And I am passionate about this for a couple of reasons. One is that I really believe strongly in people's right to have access to information to help them navigate their world.
Yes.
But I'm also really passionate about it because we have so many wonderful researchers, experts, policymakers, all kinds of people doing amazing work. And I want to really make sure that their work gets out into the world. We really need the work they're doing, and we really need them to have their messages heard loud and clear. So that's my why for doing what I do.
And honestly, that's like, I think why we get along and why we connected, because that's pretty much how I got into helping people with presentations. Was sort of the same thing. It's like there's all, like, you have great information, it's there. We just need to communicate that with slides in a different way so people hear it. And so that's just something we've really connected over and talked about a lot, which is why I'm just so excited that you are here. So thank you so much for coming on the channel.
My pleasure.
So yeah, I have a ton of questions for you, all lined up, but I do know that we want to share just a few disclaimers before we really dive in, just so people sort of know what to expect. And I know one of them was that this information is really focused on adult learning, and so if you are here watching this video and you teach like K through 12, that's not really the focus of this. It really is for adult learning, starting at like the college age, would you say, Jeanine?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of these things might apply, but because a lot of what we're going to talk about is how to make use of the experience they do have and the knowledge they do have, and that's a little bit less. There's less of that for kids. So
Yep.
yeah.
Okay. All right. So we just wanted to be clear, about that. And then the other thing was, especially because a lot of people who ask this question might be coming and looking for things like, how do I share this with the press, or how do I create sound bites? And again, that's not quite the focus of this here. We're talking more about like when you're more in control or in charge. I don't know if I'm getting that right, Jeanine, but
Yeah, I think that there are very specific things that your institution probably has about how to speak to the media and what you're going to need to say. Certainly, some of the things we'll talk about today will help you as you're trying to do that, but be aware that whatever organization you represent probably also has additional requirements for that, and we won't be going into any of that today.
yes. Okay. All right. Disclaimers over. So let's get to my questions, because I really want to hear what you have to say. All right. My first question, and I feel like you've probably experienced this, but whenever we're talking about this, like, how do I share data with maybe, non-academics or non-scientists or non-technical people? A lot of people are worried that what we're telling them to do is dumb it down. Like I've heard that phrase so
Mm,
much, like I'm not going to dumb down my material, that kind of
right.
thing. So, is that, do you hear that? Is that what this is? Dumbing it down? Like, let's sort of set the stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth unpacking that a little bit because I do hear that a lot, and that's a fear that a lot of people have. So I think it's really worth addressing. Um, so when some people say that, they mean that they're worried they're going to have to oversimplify something to the point where it loses all of its meaning. And then what's the point of sharing it at all? Um, or they're worried that another concern I've heard a lot is that they're going to have to make it somehow like sexy or entertaining.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so it's more like edutainment versus
Mm-hmm.
an accurate kind of representation of what they actually want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And, those things happen sometimes. I recognize that that's sometimes exactly what you're being asked to do.
Yeah.
And that's a really tough position to be in, and we're not going to talk about that today.
Right.
But you get a lot of empathy from over here because
Yes.
that's really difficult. Sometimes
Yes.
people don't really want to hear the complexity of what you want to say,
Mm-hmm.
and that's its own thing. Um, but sometimes, many times actually, people do really want to know what you have to say.
Yes.
They just need to know it in a way that it's not dumbed down, as we say in the plain language world, but cleared up.
Ah,
So they
yes.
just need a way they need a kind of an entry point so that it begins to make sense to them. And one way to think about this is if you're an instructor or a professor, think about like your 101 class. Now,
Mm-hmm.
inevitably you've spent years and years doing your degree and you know a lot more than what you include in your 101 class, but you don't probably typically think of that as dumbing down your information. You're thinking of that as starting at a starting place where people can actually start, knowing that they'll be introduced to complexity later. And so I guess while I would say that's um, an understandable concern, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's also helpful to think about it um, where we don't really want to oversimplify something. We want to just get a good footing and starting place so that we can introduce the complexity at the right rate,
Mm-hmm.
I guess I
Mm-hmm.
would say. And I know, I'm sure, Echo, in your experiences, like with, you know, helping people at conferences or maybe your own experience at academic conferences that you've seen, um, I know that you and I have talked in the past about sort of meeting the audience halfway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Yes. Yeah, like that's how I think I see it. So I hear people say that all the time, like, well, the audience needs to meet me halfway. But then when I see their presentations, I'm like, but you're not actually meeting them halfway. Like you're kind of making them do all the work because it's just like walls of text and bullet points and boring and overwhelming and confusing and yeah, that's not actually meeting people halfway. So the sentiment of, we kind of need to sort of meet each other. I get that. And I think that yeah, I think that working on having a clearer story and clearing up, as you said, and creating a better entry point, like that, I think is actually meeting people halfway, at
yeah,
least, or even like, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to like derail this whole conversation, but I also think sometimes I would actually encourage people to try to meet their audience where they're at and almost like I wish more people tried to meet their audience the whole way rather than make their audience do all that work. But I don't know.
yeah,
That
no,
might
I
be a
think that's a
tangent.
really good point because I think when we say we want the audience to meet us halfway, what we're really saying is almost like a motivational, like have the motivation to show up for us, right? Like
Mm-hmm,
we want,
mm-hmm.
I think more when we're saying that we want them um, to try and be participating and interested. And I think the fact that they're there is evidence. You can feel confident that they do really want to know what you have to say. But what you have the advantage of as an expert is a very rich cognitive landscape, I guess you can think of it that way, um, that you can draw upon to
Mm-hmm.
find different pathways through the content, whereas your audience doesn't have that yet,
Yeah.
really. They don't
Mm-hmm.
know enough to have that very rich garden, I think,
Mm-hmm.
of ideas and thoughts on your topic. So you, in that sense, will have to do more of the work of like figuring out what maybe they do know already, and that
Mm-hmm.
depends on their audience, or making a good sort of empathetic guess about that. Um, and then trusting that their attention is their way of showing you that they're
Mm-hmm.
meeting you halfway.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think it's easy to get trapped in kind of this false sense
Mm-hmm.
of like, I either have to dumb it down and make it easy for them, or I'm just going to have to throw them in the deep end.
Yeah.
You feel like, and understandably, people have this kind of false idea because um, they haven't been introduced to this other
Mm-hmm.
way of thinking about talking with technical audiences.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and we don't need to worry about, well, we'll probably get to this, but I think sometimes people aren't sure where to enter
Yeah.
that conversation as well. And that's a concern that some people have. And I can talk more about that. I don't know if you have another question that you want to dive in with first, but I can.
Well, it sounds like what we're talking, or at least this is how I'm interpreting it. And so I just wanted to see if you agree. But um, that it's not, again, like you said, it's not dumbing down, it's clearing up. And to me, that means it's about learning how to be an effective communicator.
Mhm.
Where, again, you're meeting the audience where they are and you're just trying to, yeah, communicate that effectively. So that's how I see it. Like, I see this as just like another example of effective communication. So I don't know. Do you also like kind of put that in that same like category? Like it's just effective communication.
Yeah, I do actually. And I think that, and I'm kind of with academics on the whole problem of, oversimplifying is just as much of a communication challenge,
Mm-hmm.
problem, as making it
Yeah.
too difficult.
Yep.
And so I do think that it's a communication skill, and that's why,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a pretty specialized one, and not everybody is trained in it. So I think
Mm-hmm.
if people don't, that's why we're doing this today, because it's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily a natural thing that
Yeah.
everybody knows how to do. I mean, I
Yep.
think sometimes, and I'm, excited today to talk about
Yes.
some tips for doing that too.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So hopefully everybody is like reassured that we're not sitting here saying just like make it the most simple, it's not about that. It's just about effectively communicating, finding that entry point and clearing up.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
that's
And
sort
I
of the
can,
stage here.
yeah. And if it's helpful, I can show kind of like a quick example of the communication challenge of doing both of that dichotomy, like the whole too hard and too simple.
Yes, please, because examples are the best.
So yeah, let me
Yes.
share a quick example
Okay.
of what I mean by that.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna share this here. Okay. So this breaks all of Echo's rules. So don't do
Don't
this.
do this.
But
No.
in a way, this
That's
is
my
kind of,
PowerPoint.
I actually did this because I wanted to
Hmm.
recreate kind of the feeling of overwhelm that happens when you hit people with the full detail right away, like all the. So
Hmm.
this is a very technical piece of medical writing that was actually written for patients though.
Mm.
Um, and it's a little bit much, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Just
Uh,
a little bit. Yeah.
I'm not going to make you read all of this, but
Please
basically,
don't.
it's what it's telling us is that there was a test you took, and your test was negative, but it's not the best test, so you might need to take another one. So,
Mm.
but here's what it looks like when you oversimplify it.
Hmm.
This is this is terrible for several reasons because first of all, we're
Yeah.
not actually giving the patient the information they need. We're not taking advantage of this opportunity for adult learning, right? So we've seen a
Yes.
lot of health literacy challenges over the last couple of years with the pandemic. Well, every opportunity, every piece of writing, everything we share from a doctor's office, for example, is an opportunity to improve that health literacy. And we're not doing any of that. We're just
Mm-hmm.
like, there's a bunch of sentences here that are like kindergarten sentences,
Yeah,
even though we're
yeah.
talking to adults.
It is
And
not enough.
I mean, yes, true, but unhelpful.
Yes.
And the other
Yeah.
problem with this is it's terrible, terrible writing. So
Mm-hmm.
so as you said, Echo, this is a communication skill, and we
Mm-hmm.
want to make sure we're doing this skillfully. And
Yes.
so we can say something more like this. Um, you recently did this test,
Mm-hmm.
which, and what we're doing here is we're not only saying you did this test, but we're saying it tested for blood in your stool, which can be a sign of colon cancer. We just did some health literacy, some health education there. And we said your test was negative, and because some people worry about get the negative positive flipped, negative bad.
Mm.
In the healthcare world, negative's good.
Yes.
Your test
Yeah.
was negative. It found no blood in your stool, right? And then it went on to say, but this doesn't find all colon cancers. At your next appointment, you and your doctor will talk about other ways to check for colon cancer, including a colonoscopy. This is the best test for finding colon
Wow.
cancer.
What
So
a
what we've done,
difference. Mm-hmm.
yeah, we started at the starting point. We got rid of some of the jargon like gold standard. That's health research jargon for the best.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we've just started at the beginning for people and grounded it in their experience.
Yeah.
So that's one example of how it doesn't have to be oversimplified or full complexity. It's more like charting a course or creating a
Mm-hmm.
path.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That is a fantastic example. And I think what I like about it too is the first one, it was just like long and wordy. And then the too simplified version was like super short. And I do think that when a lot of people hear that we're talking about, translating this for non technical audiences or clearing up, there is sometimes an assumption that it must be the shortest, like, and that just because it's
Right.
short it's good. But as you just showed, you were actually able to have something that was long, multiple sentences, but it still was just like clear and easy to understand. And I think what I like the most maybe was how you built in this, like, look, a lot of people misunderstand the whole negative is positive thing, and it was in there in a very just like casual kind of way. It didn't like stand out. It didn't make it seem like it was insulting or talking down to somebody for putting it in there. It was just like, that's what this means. So that's like a shining example. Like, everybody watching this, like, screenshot that and use that as an example of what we're talking about here and what to work towards, because I just think that was great.
Yeah, I like that you pointed out it was conversational because that's actually
Mm-hmm.
a key for written communication that a lot of people miss, right? So, written communication, especially for non experts. And the problem with the short one, not only was it not that helpful, I mean, but it didn't sound like a human was speaking it. It was a little bit of like robot speak.
Yeah. Oh.
And if you're
Oh.
focused on making it short, you're not necessarily focused on the flow of the speech. And sometimes, actually, because when people are reading, they're hearing it out loud, so we don't want to sound like a robot.
Okay. Okay. I have something to say. I don't want to like take the spotlight from you, but this
Do
just
it,
connects.
girl.
This just connects so well. So, one thing that I recommend everybody do for a presentation is to write a script and to practice it. And the way I tell people to do that is the first time you're creating your presentation, you should be writing out the script in the notes and like whispering it to yourself. I mean, you could talk out loud if you want, but
Yeah.
like whenever I'm working on a presentation, I'm sitting there going, like speaking it out loud. because it's about conversational scripts. And,
Yes.
I had to make a whole video about this, about how I do this and why I recommend it, because the number one reason people say they don't script and practice is because what? I know you've heard this too. It'll make me sound like a robot. A script
Hmm.
in practice makes me sound like I'm not a natural speaker. And it is the opposite. It is the actual opposite. Having a good script that you verbalize while you're writing it, so it's conversational, and then practicing it and making sure the flow is good. You're not missing transitional statements, you're connecting the dots. That's what makes it seem like a very natural presentation. Also helps with written products being more conversational. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that
I'm
that
so glad you
connection.
said that because, and I'm really glad that that's, and I know because I've been through your courses that that's something you recommend. But here's a little secret that professional writers and editors, technical writers and editors especially, but all of us do. We read our writing out loud or we have it read back to us by, voice, text to voice, because you often can't hear the errors. You can't see them in the writing, but you can hear them, or you can say, that sounds weird. That's not how people talk. So we recommend the exact same thing.
Yes.
And so, really, I think this shows the point that you were making before that
Mm-hmm.
so much of this is really in the category of good
Mm-hmm.
communication practice. And these are some of the tips that and tricks that communicators of all kinds use to get their point across.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And okay, this also like made a memory bubble up deep from deep from within that I think actually works as a really good transition for my next question anyway. So I remember when I was working as a research associate and I had to write a lot of reports. I did that. I spoke them out loud and I worked really hard to make sure that my reports were very conversational. And to the service providers and policymakers and non technical audience, they loved it. And I actually got like emails from them saying that was the first time I ever read an evaluation report from end to end. And I actually enjoyed, right? So, like, teardrop,
Love
okay.
that. Oh,
Like,
oh,
first of all, amazing. But then
yes.
here's the weird part. I won't name anybody, but let's just say some certain people who had power over me at that organization told me to stop. Told me to stop doing that because I was, quote, too folksy. And that's kind of the next question I have. Or can you share some advice? Because I do think that some people are worried that they're going to be like judged by their peers and colleagues for
Yeah.
actually communicating effectively. So
Hmm.
if you can maybe talk a little bit about that, and then yeah, I don't know, maybe respond to those of us who actually have had some like weird comments, even though there was clear evidence, like written email evidence that the people reading the report actually loved it. So yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I'm glad you brought this up because this is a concern I hear quite a bit,
Yeah.
whether I'm the person doing the writing
Yeah.
or I'm helping somebody else. Um, and I'd love to be able to say, oh no, that never happens, but
Mm.
obviously you just told me a
I
story
know.
about when it does.
Sorry.
And so you're not wrong. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of thing does happen. Certainly professionals of all kinds, but academics in particular can be pretty harsh judges of their peers. I mean, it's part of the role to do that, but also um, there's a little bit of tension in the academic world about how to deal with popularizing your research or your science. Um, and there's some reasons behind that. There have definitely been examples of people who have written more for the popular press and their science hasn't been very good. Their research is terrible. So I think that they
Hmm.
sometimes set up this expectation that if you're writing for the popular, press or for regular people, you're not doing real science because there have been examples that that's actually happened. But so you might encounter that, and I
Hmm.
think your but know that your work speaks for you. If you're doing good work, that still says volumes. And as a person who consumes a lot of good science from the popular press perspective, I hope you'll continue to consider doing that, because
Oh,
that
yeah.
sometimes that's the only way I have access to your work.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'll say too, one other related thing is sometimes academics. So our areas are so specialized these days that even if you're like, well,
Mm,
my fellow PhD doesn't really need me to explain things well because they're an academic. But people are very specialized, so people don't know your topic
yeah,
well. And when you do take the time to carefully explain it, and again, we're not talking about dumbing it down, remember we discussed
that's
that.
right.
But when
Hmm.
you do take the time to carefully explain it, you're actually kind of helping them out.
Hmm.
Like say you're at a conference, it's really tough for someone with advanced education to ask questions because it's hard to look like you don't know. And so when you are
Hmm.
carefully explaining your area, you're welcoming even those other fellow experts into the conversation in a way that helps them even kind of save face.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
while you're right that there is this tension between, are we speaking academic or are we speaking in a more everyday folksy way? Um, a lot of people in today's
Yep.
very complex world appreciate the point of entry of introducing things in a way that's easy to enter into.
Yeah.
And people will really appreciate that. Many people will.
Hmm.
Um,
And I will say, just to sort of like come full circle and give a little conclusion to my story. Um, Again, I how I responded was kind of like, well, the report wasn't for you, was it? I mean, just being
Fair.
honest here, but the report was for them, and the people it was written for loved it, and that mattered more to me actually, which may explain why I'm no longer there. And here's the thing: I've been doing that. I've been doing this for I don't even know how long now, over a decade. Like it's been a while. That was like the only time I ever got a negative comment. 99.99% of the time, peers and colleagues, or even people above me, when I was a grad student and it was faculty, they had only good things to say. Like, that was an amazing presentation. Best conference presentation I've ever seen. And I'm not saying that as like a secret brag or whatever it's called. What's that called? I don't know. Like a
Humble brag.
humble brag. Yeah, there we go. Like I'm actually like not doing a humble brag. I'm doing this to like reassure people because that story that I told, right? Obviously it stood out. It popped up during this interview. So they do stand out, but they are by no means the norm. And it's like when we get like the one bad comment on an evaluation survey and like that becomes the loudest. And so I'm actually like saying this to everybody watching the video to say like don't let that one naysayer be the loud one because everyone will appreciate it. Just like you said, Jeanine, and I'm so glad that you even mentioned this. Like even the other experts, but just who specialize in another field, will appreciate it. Or even someone who is an expert in your own field, and they just like got no sleep the night before, and they're just really tired that day. They're gonna love you for just kind of like setting that stage and just communicating it in a conversational, effective way. So yeah, just a
I couldn't agree more. And especially right now, I think, the more sort of cognitive effort we can save people, the better. I mean, everybody's running a lot of RAM on all
mhm,
kinds of things. COVID brain is real.
mhm.
We know that when we're overwhelmed with new things and change, and especially if it's got an emotional component, which a lot of what we're just dealing with in our world today does. And so if we so could your fellow academics do that extra cognitive work? Yeah, they probably could. They have the skills to do it.
Mhm.
But we don't need to make them. The more important thing for you is to make sure that you're getting your work out into the world. That's the most important thing. And you're right, Echo. most people just super appreciate it
Yep.
and really are grateful that you took the time to do it. And so the fear is real,
Hmm.
but the reality for the most part is people appreciate it. And again, I would appeal to your sense of maybe justice
Yes,
for the rest of the world. We
that's right.
really need your work. We want
That's
to
right.
hear about it, and we're going to need you to help us out. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, exactly. Like, do it for them, do it for justice. And there, you cannot please every single person anyway. And um yeah, so like still do it anyway. Um I have so my next question sort of related to this, or related to maybe more of our first question actually, is again, I kind of almost want to like validate some of the current concerns that people have so that we can talk through them. And I do think that one reason, maybe another reason people are a little worried that we're just telling people to dumb it down is because of formulas. So I know that when I've researched this, how to do this, what we're talking about, I've seen readability formulas, which I actually don't have a ton of experience with or using. But yeah, like what are they? Readability formulas, or like writing at a grade level. And I feel like I saw this when we did some like federal grants, even
yeah.
like it was part of some checklists. So I don't know, it's kind of like gray, so it's not like the super coherent question. But what's your
No.
take on formulas? I guess is really
So
my
I'm
question.
glad you asked the question, and I'm also encouraged to hear that you haven't heard that much about it, because
Oh,
I'd like to
good.
just state outright that I prefer people don't use them, and I'll explain
Ah,
why. And then I want to talk to you about the people who have to use them. So in our last, the last question you asked me was more geared toward the academic world, though it shows up in related worlds like policy and government.
mm,
This question really does hit our poor academic policymakers who are working in government, especially because, like so many things, the government had a good intention of requiring its vendors and its employees to simplify some information for the public to make it accessible to the public. And what turned into a good intention became a kind of a burden. And what they did was they said, we want everything written at a sixth grade level or an eighth
mm,
grade level.
okay, yeah, that
And
sounds
then you
familiar.
think,
Hmm.
well, that's kind of the grade leveling you were talking about. And then you think, well, what is
Yeah,
what does that
what,
mean?
what?
How do you find out what that is? And so there are these readability formulas that will tell you what grade level your text is
Okay.
written at. And one of the more well-known ones, like if you're working in Microsoft Word, um,
Hmm.
and you run your spell check and your grammar check, you can also, there's an option for doing the Flesh Kincaid grade level assessment. So it will pop out with your kind of more of your grammar and spelling check. It will pop out these readability statistics. It'll give you your Flesh reading score and the Flesh Kincaid grade level.
Okay.
And so sometimes this is the one that people will use. But I think it's important to understand what kind of like mysterious thing is happening in that black box of taking your text and then
Yes.
crunching it up and saying this is something a sixth grader could read. Um, when
Yeah.
that happens, what's actually happening is it's looking, these readability formulas, they're all a little different, but they're mostly looking at the length of the sentences and the number of words in a sentence and the number of syllables in the words in your text. So
Syllables.
it's
Okay.
counting that stuff, right? Um, so
Okay.
you can see how that would be where they're getting at, right? So, like a kindergartner doesn't know multisyllabic words,
Right.
maybe.
Right. Right.
Um, and maybe, and long sentences tend to be harder ones to read because you have to have either the knowledge or the working memory to
Mm-hmm.
track from the beginning to the end of the sentence to make a complete thought. So you can see where they're going. But you might also begin to imagine their limitations, right? So
Yes.
if you're being forced to write at a sixth grade reading level, that means you're going to have to really limit your use of multisyllabic words, which there are many of them, and I can show you some examples. But if you think
Yes.
about it, like, so for example, I was looking at a report on climate change, and there's a lot of there, it's a complex issue. There's a lot of complex things in it. Certainly, there are things we can do to make a pathway through the content, as we talked about before. But when I was trying to make it be at a sixth grade reading level, like technically by
Hmm.
some of these standards, you end up with something like, ah, carbon hurts the air. Why am I alive? Like that's all you can do. You can't,
Yeah.
you know. And that's,
Oh no.
as we referred to before, that's no more helpful
Why? Yeah.
than, you know,
Yeah, I mean, you can't.
than the very complex report,
Yeah.
because then we have a gap of information. So
It's like saying in your earlier example, right? This is not good enough.
yeah,
It's like carbon hurts the air.
yes, carbon hurts air.
Sounds like a bot. Like that almost
Yeah,
seems like stranger. Like
yeah,
yeah.
yes. So
Not good.
so
Not
the
good.
readability stuff it's I would say the way to use it is it's a good tool in your toolbox,
Okay.
but it's not. So it's good at sort of alerting you to the fact that you have a problem,
Okay.
but it's not great at diagnosing what your problem is.
Hmm.
It might give you a tip off, like maybe your sentences are too long, I don't know.
Mm.
But it's not great at really telling you what your problem is, and it's certainly not great um, at diagnosing
Yeah.
or giving you a solution. So,
Right.
I mean, I can show you, I have another example
Yeah.
that I can share actually
Yes.
to show you
Please.
where this,
I mean,
the
I don't know about
limitations.
anybody watching, but I am sitting here like running through all sorts of like words from like statistics, even like that are, they take quite a few syllables sometimes, but like that's the
Yeah.
word,
And
people,
people
yeah,
need to know it,
people need to
right?
know it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
um,
So,
okay.
and that's a really good point, Echo, that I want to get back to
Okay.
after I show this example.
Yeah.
But here, so again, this is a wall of text I'm not expecting you to read. It's really boring. It's going to make your eyes glaze over. The sentences are too. Oh, wait, is this one long sentence? Perhaps it is. I
I
think
think
it
it is.
is.
Yeah. No, I see
Ah,
a period. I
yes.
see one. There's two sentences.
Okay. Yeah.
Still. Oh.
So it's too
Ah,
much
ah.
for sure. So I took this text, and I think this, it's you really can't. One thing about reading formulas is you really shouldn't do them on a small section of text. You need a good sample of your text to be able to run any kind of statistics on it, which
Mm.
sounds familiar, right? I mean, with
Yeah.
anything, if you're going to run some data on something, and you're going to test it, you want a good sample. But so this is an excerpt of a larger sample that I ran readability statistics on, and this scored at above a high school reading level. So the whole thing was pretty complicated. So I needed to do that. Well, in some extreme situations, people are asked to rewrite content at a fourth grade reading level, and that's
Oh.
really, really too low for any kind of adult. Anything
Mm-hmm.
an adult might need to know about the world. It
Mm-hmm.
just doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
You lose access to a lot of words, so then you end up with things like this, and this should look familiar by now. This type of thing at a medical home. Oh, in this example, this is the other thing. What I did was I wrote a bunch of sentences like this and ran it through the readability checker, and it didn't flag that there's a grammatical problem, that these sentences don't make any sense. It was just like, check, you wrote it at a fourth grade reading level, yay.
Okay, so this passed.
This passed with flying
At
colors.
And it says, at a medical home, get a place for healthcare. Your doctor, head coach for medical home, like team. Connect care with medical home. Okay, I need to do a video just reading these, please. That was hilarious. Okay, yeah, and so that passed. There you go.
No readability formula will tell you. I mean, your word grammar check will tell you, but a readability test won't. It'll be
Yeah.
like, great, fourth grade reading level, you're good. So
Okay.
it
Okay.
doesn't do
Yeah.
it doesn't help you at all tell you if it makes sense, if
Mm-hmm.
even if the words are in a grammatical order that the English language uses,
Mm,
none of that.
okay. All
Um,
right. Huge problem.
so I would say I would argue that even though these are at a fourth grade reading level, they're not much more helpful than the previous slide.
I
Um,
agree. I think I'd agree with you, Janine. I
and
think I'd agree.
so even though you've followed the letter of the law, you've written at a fourth grade reading level, you've still effectively excluded people from an important conversation about something that's happened to their health care or that is happening with their
That's
health
right.
care.
That's right.
And so once again, I took this content and rewrote it.
Mm-hmm. All right.
This is not at a fourth grade reading level. This is probably closer to seventh.
All right. I'll do a dramatic reenactment.
Yes,
So
please do.
it says your primary care doctor is your medical home, where you will get most of your health care. Your medical home doctor will look at all your health needs and work with other doctors to get you the right care. Wow, see, that made perfect sense. And I love it. I love it.
So something like this, you're not going to be able to get at a fourth grade reading level. You're going to have to raise the technical reading level,
I'm
but
sorry, and I
that's
think I might have missed it because I was too excited about doing my reenactment. So that example that was actually like concise and it made sense. What was the reading level for
I
that one?
think that was around grade seven, tested
Grade
at a
7.
seventh grade reading level. Yeah.
All right. So if you're doing the fourth grade, if you're doing the sixth grade, that failed, even though actually reading it made a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the sentences were a length that usually even who are challenged, if people can't read at all, that's a whole separate problem. But if people with a lower literacy, those sentences were written in a way that they were short enough, so we were able to address that part of the problem, that people could kind of track on it. And
Mm-hmm.
even so those readability formulas will look at words that are 3 syllables and above. Um, we needed some of those 3 syllable words. Medical is a 3 syllable word, and we have to keep that. But they're words we made sure were familiar, probably familiar to most people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that the readability formulas won't necessarily tell you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, actually, I can show you another
Mm.
example, a
Yes.
couple other examples.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Do
so
I get to
let's look
do
at
more
this.
reenactments, please?
I hope you will,
Because it's
actually.
really fun. Oh, I'm not going to do that. That's too long. It is
No,
a
don't read. Please
wall of
don't read
text.
this. And again, this
Yeah.
has a lot of so we know this got this tested very high reading level 2.
Okay.
But it's understandable. There's a lot of things. A word like
Yeah.
interoperability,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really tough. That happens to be a multisyllabic word that's also really hard to understand. So
Yeah. Yeah.
no need to read all of this, but just to
Okay,
give you a
good.
sense of what it's about, this
Yeah.
was for a company that helps healthcare, emergency services, and law enforcement get on the same systems so that they are able to refer people to services and things like that. So are able to use the actual computer systems software to track on what's happening in the community. So we started with this whole thing. By the way, I want to point out here that this SAS up here at the top, establishing interoperability via SAS, it says, and that will not test very high in a readability formula because it's 1 syllable, but a lot of people don't know what that means.
Good point, Janine.
So just another way that readability formulas aren't always helpful, and won't always tell you where the problem is. Again,
Okay.
we dumb this down. Systems must work. Okay, Echo, you're on.
Okay. Okay. I mean, you could do it. I don't want to.
No, you go.
Okay. This what reading level is this?
This again was a fourth grade, or it might have even been. No, it was fourth. Yeah.
All right. So this is fourth grade reading level. It passed. Systems must work together. Fire. Sorry. Fire, police, and EMTs need data. I can't do it. Healthcare does too. It is bad if they all have their own system.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking, I wonder if this one was more like a fifth grade level, because
It
here's the
says
thing, the word together is a three-syllable word, even though it's one kindergartners know, but it's going to test high because it's a three-syllable
three
word.
syllables. Oh my
Hmm.
goodness. I mean, how do you?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, so you can't say like regression. Like I did a regression analysis. That regression word.
It's interesting. No, you're going to if you have to use that a lot
Mm.
in your text, you're going to have trouble scoring at one of those regulation grade levels. But
I
uh,
did a even statistic. Even saying the word. I'm like now. I'm like, okay, what are three syllable words? Like
yeah,
you know, I
yeah.
did an analysis.
Hmm.
My results. Two words. I have a
Yeah.
result.
Okay, that's all you can say.
That's what I can say.
Um,
Okay, I'm
yeah, but
getting too distracted now.
it's interesting to
Yeah.
point out though that the word together and the word
Yeah.
regression will test at the same level, where we
Yeah.
know that
Yeah.
together is a really common word and regression
Yes.
isn't. So
Yeah.
you have
Hmm.
to know
Yeah.
that you might not have to
Hmm.
explain together, but
Right.
regression, you should
You should
absolutely explain it to your
agree.
audience,
Agree.
but don't avoid using it,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Right. Exactly.
yeah.
Okay. Oh
So
my
then we
God.
can do something a little bit more. This is probably more like a seventh or eighth grade reading level
All
here.
right. All right. I'll do a quick. I'll try to read
Yeah.
fast. So, our cloud-based software connects EMS, police, and healthcare for a more coordinated response. It makes systems work together so all responders are using and updating a common data set. Everyone will be able to communicate in real time and respond with the most up-to-date information. And part of the reason I am reading this, everybody watching, if you're like, why are you doing this, Echo? Because again, we earlier made a point of how saying it out loud often really drives home how effective it is. So it's not like just to kind of be funny and dramatic. It's like saying it out loud really shows the difference between the two, I think. So hopefully
Yeah.
people enjoy
Thank
it.
you. No, I'm glad you read them, and I think that that does actually drive home the point that we made earlier, that you sometimes what you can, especially if you're in the weeds, obsessed with grade level
Mm-hmm.
formula stuff, you
That's
can
right.
kind of forget that it actually has to sound
Yeah.
right too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I guess I would say you can use readability formulas with that caveat that it only gives you a piece of the information you're going to need to, you still have to do the work, and we'll talk a little bit more about this and maybe after, but you still have to do the work of figuring out where's my audience at and what do they need, and what will they understand and what might not they
Mm-hmm.
understand.
Yeah.
But if you do use readability formulas, I would say fine to use that one in Word, the Flesch Kincaid. I do recommend checking out readabilityformulas.com if you're going to use readability formulas, and remember, use responsibly. Um, but this site it'll run several of them. So
Hmm.
you have the option to run several of them because they all calculate things a little bit differently, and you can see like sometimes the Flesch Kincaid will score something at a ninth grade reading level, but another one will score it at a seventh, not usually not that broad sometimes,
Mm.
but an eighth or a tenth.
Mm.
So it's worth
Wow.
running a couple. That's what I
Okay.
would recommend. One of the ones I do like on that site is something called the Dale Shaw, this Dale Shaw word list here. Because what it does is it runs some scores, and it does give you a grade level, but it also gives you information about how to interpret these readability scores in addition to just this label of a grade level.
Hmm.
This, by the way, this example was on that climate change report I ran. It was at a very high reading level, as you can see,
Mm-hmm.
college graduate. And then what it does underneath these scores is it gives you the words that are three
Ah.
syllables and above.
Okay.
So then
Okay.
you can eyeball this and you can be like, well, people are going to understand things like
Yeah.
understanding,
Yeah.
resulting, and essential probably, but they might
Mm-hmm.
have trouble with things like emissions, atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
photosynthesis, carbonation, and
Mm-hmm.
and so what this does is it saves you from having to dig through your document of
Mm-hmm.
what were the words they thought were hard, and it gives
Yeah.
you a list of them.
And it could even be just good for tightening up your language because,
Yeah.
I see furthermore, which, maybe when you see it and it stands out, you can take another look and see if you can just shorten that to a different word or just,
Yeah.
So I could see how it could help even sometimes with that.
Yeah. So that's what I would recommend, just because it gives you a little bit more information. So that's again,
Nice.
readabilityformulas.com.
All right. Sweet. Thanks.
Yeah.
All righty. Oh my gosh, so much fun. Thank you for the chance to do some dramatic reenactments. I appreciated that.
And I appreciate that you did it.
And I think it makes sense too because you know people want formulas and I get it. And even with like presentation design, people want formulas and I have to constantly say they don't really help. So I guess like the closest formula we have in the presentation design world are templates. It's almost like a design formula. Like you just plug in your text and then it, spits out like a design for your slide. Like smart art or even just like slide templates. And they don't work for that. Like they don't even work for design. So if you're watching and this is like the first video you're seeing, stop using templates for your slides, please, because they don't work and it's kind of the same thing. Like it just doesn't work. And so why would it make sense? Why would it work fully for like the actual words that you're using too? So
Yeah. I love that about your training, Echo, that where you say, trust yourself and these tips about how to lay things out, as opposed to trusting these templates that someone who doesn't even know as much probably as you do about how to lay something out designed. And so I think the parallel is really there,
Yeah.
like similarly, I mean, I guess where it breaks down is I wouldn't even recommend looking at the templates. They're usually not even useful to look at. Readability formulas, you can look at it and see it as a data point, but then you really have to still use best communication practices and trust your own sense of
Yep.
what will people know and what might they not know. And if you're not sure, you can just ask somebody, your friend or
Yeah.
somebody,
Yep.
like if I told this to people, do you think it would make sense to them? And make sure you ask somebody who's not in your field,
Yeah.
But there are simple ways to kind of check that stuff
Yep.
that aren't about formulas.
Yeah. 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 I would say the closest is sometimes I will tell people you can look at the smart art gallery, but don't click.
Yeah, get
Don't
ideas.
click. You can get maybe some inspiration from some of those, but then do it yourself. It will be a million times better and more effective and designed well. And I will stop my rant there. So, okay, no formulas. Well, what do people do? What do people do, Jeanine? Like, help.
Yeah,
What are
right.
some ideas?
Yeah, so there are actually we've kind of alluded to some of them as we've been talking, but um, so readability formulas aren't your answer, and that's okay because there are other ones. So one of the things I would suggest for those of you who teach as well as do research, take off your writer hat for a minute and put on your teacher hat. Like you do this quite a bit, where you're thinking about where do I start? How do I help introduce the content? How do I, teachers know this language of how do I help people access what they already know? So draw on a base of what people might already know. A lot of that is looking at, and this applies for people who aren't teachers too. A lot of that, it starts with what is more everyday language that allows people to enter into the conversation, and then we can introduce words like regression, if we need to. But where do we we don't start people in statistics on day one with the word regression. We help them understand what's going on and what variables are and all this other stuff. So we can start with everyday words. At some point the everyday words won't be enough and you'll need your technical terms if we're not going to dumb this down, as we discussed before. But it's great to start with those words. And look at the ones where, we use jargon amongst ourselves in professions. It's like a shorthand,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes we don't really need it. We use it. So look at those places where you could replace jargon with everyday words and do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then where you do need the technical term, make sure you introduce it and explain it. So that's, man, if you only do one thing, um, do that, and shorten your sentences. Academics, we get
Mm-hmm.
used to writing in very, very long sentences. And so
Yes.
remember that it's very taxing on the working memory when you're learning something new to read a really long sentence about it. So just shorten those sentences. So those are two things. If you started doing them today, um, that would get you a long way.
Yeah.
And I would say that, the other thing, and this is maybe a little bit more. This is up one level in communication skills, but I know that your readers and listeners are smart folks, and so I think they're going to be able to do this. So probably a lot of them are already doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Is thinking about how you're going to frame your content. So um, that's a communication term, and I think sometimes it's been used to make your content biased. So that's why
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean it in that way, and I don't want you to worry that I'm asking you to sort of like make it come from a certain philosophical perspective. What I mean is everything to be learned has to have a frame, what we're
Mm-hmm.
focusing on and what we're not focusing on, or people's heads explode. We can't take in everything.
Right.
So, what we're going to
Yep.
do is we're going to say, here's what we're talking about today, and here's what this is about. And when you do that kind of framing, you may find that you automatically do this. You're using a lot of metaphors and analogies. So
Metaphors and analogies. Yes, for the win.
yeah. So we're
Ah,
talking
yeah.
about we're going to talk about whatever
Mm-hmm.
topic. And
Mm-hmm.
this is like
Mm.
this. And so an analogy is just a very, very deep metaphor where a lot of the parts correspond to other
Mm-hmm.
parts. And it's one of the primary ways, maybe the primary way that humans learn anything, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we learn, that's how we build on our knowledge. We say, oh, I'm now learning about this, which is like this other thing, but now different in these ways.
Yes.
So that's how we begin to frame what we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about. Don't be afraid to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Help people orient them to where they are. So that's sort of a next level skill, but I know that
Mm-hmm.
that's one that your
Yeah.
viewers and listeners can do, and probably are doing a lot of without realizing it
Yep.
even. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Even examples. Like even just giving examples sometimes. Like just saying that word. For example. Like you've
huge.
done. You brought examples with us or with you today
Yeah.
for this video, and just literally having just an example I think really can help too. So, and then yeah, analogy and metaphor definitely are like next level examples. So yeah.
Yeah, and I
Mm-hmm.
would say that that's a great point, Echo. And examples, and I would throw an educator term in there, non-examples,
Mm-hmm.
are both a key to work alongside analogies and metaphors, because what we're saying is, here's what we're learning. It's like this, and we can give some examples. And then we
Mm-hmm.
say, but it's not like this in these ways. And then we can give non-examples, like and you do lots of non-examples
Oh, okay. I was gonna
in
ask,
your
like, what's a
training.
non-example? I see what you're
Yeah, it's
saying.
an
It's
example of
like,
what not to do, right? Or
ah,
what this
okay.
thing isn't,
Yeah.
right? So we
Oh,
learned today,
I do
just
lots of non-examples, and I
you
didn't
do
even know
actually, and
it.
it really helps.
Mm.
It helped me learn your content, because I'm like, I think I understand what she's saying. What are we going for? And then you'd show me what we were going for, but then you also showed me what we weren't going for. And that's how I found my path through the content. So we did some of
Ah,
that even today. I showed you some things not to
yeah.
do and some things to do. And both of those
Yep.
probably equally helped. So I like that
Nice.
point about examples. They're so key.
Mm.
They help make something concrete
Mm.
that, especially the more abstract your work is, The
Mm,
more we need examples to understand.
yes. Yeah. Oh, shout out to like everyone in chemistry, please.
Yes.
I struggled so much in chemistry because I was like, I can't, I don't, I
Can't
need,
see it.
can't see
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Hmm.
But yes, in general, abstract. Well, cool. Well, now I'm going to have to pay more attention to making sure I'm doing non-examples. Thank you. Now I have a new framework for how I do things. Thanks, Janine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, a couple other things to consider that are simple things you could do right now that also are things that I know Echo emphasizes in her trainings is, you know, leave enough white space, like on the page. Because what we're doing when we're asking someone to learn new content is we're really working their brain and we want to remove any challenges to that. So I don't know, Echo, if you have more to say about that, but that's really helps people quite a bit.
Just give people breathing room,
Breathing room.
mentally, visually, give people that space. I think I think especially with data, the biggest sort of content mistake that I see in our presentations are data dumps. And there's no space in between each fact or, statistic or whatever, or sentence even. And yeah, so it helps with design visually, but also just the content itself. Just like give people a moment. just
Yeah,
give them a second. At least that's how I'm interpreting what you're saying. But
that's exactly it.
okay.
Yeah, no, because what it does is it not only makes it visually more digestible and
Hmm.
appealing, but what you're doing when you give white space is you're actually forcing a slower pace of the content. So,
Hmm.
uh, if you haven't taken any
Mm.
of Echo's trainings, and I encourage you to do so, she'll talk about how
Thank
it's much
you.
better to do over a series of 3 or 4 slides what you were tempted to cram into one. And part of what that does is it makes it's more engaging, which she talks about in her training, but also it forces a pacing that's a more human pace for absorbing your content.
Oh, pacing. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. So, and that and that applies to reports too. I mean, the number of reports where it's like the whole page just feels like it's 1,000 words of text on a page, and it's like, you know, maybe increase the margin a little bit or
Put a
add in an
visual.
extra space between those paragraphs,
Hmm.
like just give me some blank space in here,
Yeah.
just so that I can read less on a page, and it gives
Yep.
as I turn the page, it gives me almost like a moment. Yeah, so I love
Right.
that blank space. Please, we need more of it in just everything. I think. Okay, question. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, a question I know that people are going to be asking. Um, I know that people will be wondering, hold on, examples, non examples, metaphors, analogies, entry points. This sounds like a lot of work. So everybody's worried about that. Everybody's worried about how long things take. And I get it. I'm not like insulting anybody because people are overworked, underpaid, all the things. So, but let's talk about that. And I'm curious what
Hmm.
you have to say about like, yeah, does this take forever to do? Does this mean they need 30 versions of a product to work with all these different audiences to do all of the things? So,
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up.
yeah.
Um, It's like any new skill. It might take a little more time in the beginning as you're learning how to say, something the way you wrote it perhaps for your academic paper may not be exactly the way you want to write it in a presentation or an article or something that's more for non-experts. So any skill will take a little bit of more time in the beginning. But like I said, I would encourage you to look at some of the other things you've done. For example, if you're a teacher, you may already have some slides and some content that you can pull from the way you presented it to when you introduce the content to students. Um, and I think you don't have to apply all of these tips at once, too. And I said before, if you
Hmm.
can work on shortening your sentences or following some of the tips that Echo gives for her presentations where you're doing less per slide, even that alone will really help people. Um, and the other thing I would say is we have this idea in communications that we call layering, basically. And if you think about on a website when you read about something and you can click for more, like it might accordion out or click on a plus
Yeah.
sign and you get more information. So if you think about especially for presentations, think about on any given topic, you can design some introductory slides, some building on that, and then maybe some very technical slides after that. And if then you have something that's walked people from the entry point to the complexity. Now, you might not need those all the time, but you'll
Hmm.
have them designed and you can pull the ones you need. So sometimes all you need to tell people is, regression takes into account um, multiple
Hmm.
variables that we looked at in this study, and that's all you're going to need to say. But then sometimes you're going to need to say more about that.
Yep.
Well, if you can invest a little bit of time in building that layering out, think about
Hmm.
again as clicking on that plus sign or clicking for more on a website, then you already have that content.
And a lot of people ask me, especially in my training, and they get surprised because what a lot of people do and what I used to do is I used to have like 10 versions of a presentation. Like, oh, if I talk about it in a lecture, there's that slide deck. If it's for the conference presentation, it's that slide deck. If it's for a conference presentation but it's double the time, there's a separate slide deck. And one of the biggest changes that I've made to save time, especially in this context, and especially with layering, I didn't know the term for it, but now I do. All of that's one slide deck. Like if it's the same topic, it should be one presentation file, and that one file has all of those slides. But you use the feature in PowerPoint called hide, so you can
Yeah.
right click in the if you're in PowerPoint. Maybe I'll have an editing. Maybe I need a visual. I need a visual, people. But the left hand column, the thumbnails of the slides, if you right click that slide, you'll get a pop up and you can hide it. And it stays in the presentation file. But when you go to present, it's hidden. It doesn't show up. And then that's how you can do layering on like both ends. You can have, okay, here's a few slides to basically set it up and to be the entry point for the thing. And then you have the thing. And then layer number two, I guess, okay, if this is like my people who get it and who want like super more details and want the complexity, then you've got that second layer right there. And then it's just you activate or hide slides depending on that audience and that presentation. So hopefully somebody watching is like, that's new, because that's one of the best ways that you can save time, I think, in with layering in a presentation context. But like when I was doing evaluation, we also layered in other ways for reports. And I know that this is sort of becoming a more popular topic, but like what I started doing when I wrote reports was the report was 30 pages, okay? And in evaluation, that's like, somebody out there gasped because evaluation reports are like 250 pages, okay? Like have you seen, right? Like
Yeah.
they're like, they're books, okay? But it's just a simple matter of like the first 30 pages, it's like table of contents, summary, that kind of thing. It's the highlights, some of the data, the key data to support the highlights, and then a 300-page appendix. And you basically just like shove it to the appendix. And it's not even like tricking people. It really is like it's layering. I didn't know the word for it, but that was layering. And then we combined it with like a 2-page visual summary, like an infographic. So it's like 2 layers of layering, I guess. two ways
Yeah.
to layer, right? The visual summary, the most accessible, most visually engaging way to share the findings, then the actual report, which is the middle part, the stuff, and then for all the other evaluators and researchers who are like, no, 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 I want that specific N, that specific sample size for that specific item. That's in the
Hmm.
appendix in the tables. You can have it there.
I love that
Yeah.
example of layering because that's another way to think about what we're suggesting here, and we do it for these kinds of reports that we know are going to need to be consumed by decision makers too,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
So that's
mm-hmm.
a really good example where the minority of people that want to dig into those details, we make that available to them because I know that your integrity as a researcher and an
Yeah.
academic is really important, and that kind
Yep.
of transparency, we want to make sure it's there.
Yes,
So we make it
absolutely.
available, but we don't make it a barrier. We don't
Yep.
make it front and center for
Yeah.
people who don't need it.
I love that. And even for qualitative, again, I gave an example of quantitative. I remember we had some quotes again to sort of highlight the key findings and the key takeaways, but that appendix had the full quotes, the whole thing. And because I know some people are worried about editing quotes, and losing that context, and that seemed like a really happy middle ground of, again, like just a piece of a quote was in the main report, but then the full thing was later on for the people who did want to read the entire quote. But it helped make sure that the base information, there was a good pace to it, and then it was accessible. So I love that. That is a good word for it, and I'm so glad that you shared that, because I think that really is going to help, especially with this idea of like balancing efficiency with transparency, and having that research integrity. I love it.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that example. And I would say also that, back to the original, when we were talking about your question about um, doing communication or presenting to other academics,
Mm-hmm.
remember that you'll still probably need layering for them too.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those people are not exactly in your field and they might know a little bit, or they might, because they're academics, they might have certain academic language down, like regression, like analysis, but you're still going to want to, that's going to be a different layer, so to speak, than people who work in your
Yes.
exact field. So I
Yes.
think that even though it may take a little bit more time in the beginning to
Mm-hmm.
design your sort of introduction kind of content, your more meaty content, and then your very technical content, you'll
Mm-hmm.
use those slides so much that in the end,
Yes.
I think it will be really worthwhile to do it.
Yep.
And as all things, you know, that that I certainly, when I recommend things, and I know that Echo does too in her trainings, you might not be able to do all this at once, and that's
Yeah.
okay. Take one or
Yes.
two things from today that worked for
Yes.
you, start
Yes.
doing that, and it will be better than before.
Yes, exactly. There's no such thing as like a perfect presentation, perfect report. It's just about making sure it's better than last time. I'm glad that you said that, because sometimes I forget to say that. And then people are like, I can't do all of this all at once. And it's like, you don't have to.
You
Just
don't.
choose one or two things, the one or two things that really stood out to you. Just do that and just do better each time. That's it. Oh my gosh. Okay. Is there anything else that you want, sort of like last thoughts that I didn't ask about, that you want to make sure? Yeah. And anything else?
No, I don't think so. Just
Nice.
except to reiterate that uh, we're so glad that you're all out there doing the complex work you're
Yes.
doing. Thank you so much for your work. And even when it's hard, I hope that you will continue to put it out into the world.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
we need
Oh,
it.
oh, that was beautiful. Thank you. Okay, Jeanine. So before we wrap up, my last question to you is, you're obviously awesome and you know how to do this, and I know that you help people. So can you tell us a little bit about, if someone wants to work with you, how do they do that, and what services do you offer?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. So you can find me at inpraxiscommunications.com.
The link will be below.
Um, And I help experts present, so I do writing, editing,
Yeah.
learning design. So not so much graphic design, but really the kinds of things I was talking about before, like what do we say first, then what do we say, pacing, all of that kind of thing. Those are all services that I offer, uh, including report writing, um, and other other products that you might have to. I also do edit academic texts as well. But
Mhm.
my passion and my love and the thing that I love to help people with the most is helping them get their work out into the world by writing it in a way that that non-experts can understand.
Ah, I love that. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on this channel is because I help people with slides and presentations and speaking. And a lot of people also have to write reports, and so they've asked me for help, and I've done it. I've written the reports and everything, but it's not a service I offer. It's not a training I offer, and I won't. So I'm saying it now. I'm not gonna do it. So go to Jeanine. Jeanine is so good at doing this, and Jeanine can help.
And I
So
love to do it.
yay! All right. Well, make sure that you all check out the links below so you can connect with Jeanine. And Jeanine, just one last time, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited about publishing this video, and just thank you again.
Thank you, Echo. It's been a pleasure.
All right, bye.
Bye.